Hey, welcome back. My name's Justin. Today I want to talk about how to reduce rebound on your electronic kick drum. Here's sometimes what happens. You go to a music store, you play an awesome big electronic drum set like an F-Note, an ATV, a Gava, Pearl, whatever. They have a big mesh kick drum that's like 22 inches across, 18 inches across, and you're inspired. You decide that it's just what your electronic drum set at home needs, but you don't want to spend $500 to $800 to buy one of these suckers separately. So you decide to just go build it yourself. I've made guides online, other people have as well. It's really easy now. So you go pick up a mesh head, you go buy a trigger system somewhere, and you throw it together over the weekend. But now you have something that looks just as good as the big stuff from the big companies, but it doesn't feel the same at all. In fact, it's got the trampoline effect really bad. It's overly bouncy, the rebound's out of control, and because of that, it's not as satisfying to play on as you were hoping for. So today I'm going to show you how to do this, how to avoid this problem, either when you're purchasing this stuff to make the conversion project, or if you've already bought stuff, how to fix it after the fact. That's coming up. But first, today's video is brought to you by the Edrum Nation contest. If you want to win some free drum gear like free electronic cymbals, gift cards, a Roland SPDSX Pro, a Hawk Drum shell pack, and more, simply film yourself playing your electronic drum set, post the video online, tag and follow EdrumCenter, and use the hashtag EdrumNation. Now you're in the running. To learn full contest details, check out the link in the description below. Okay, so there are two basic ways of making your kick drum feel less bouncy, which leads to, in my opinion, it being more fun to play on and more realistic feeling. The first is the damping system, and the second is just go buy a thick mesh head. The damping system is a big block of foam that presses against the inside of your mesh head. All the big companies that make electronic drums, they use this in their designs, and yet it's oddly missing from a lot of third-party kick drum triggers. So this first one is the inside of a Gava G9 drum set that I reviewed on the channel. After removing the drum head, which ended up being like a 2-ply from Remo, you see this massive piece of foam. This thing is huge. I think it's like a memory foam design, and there's a cutout for the actual kick drum trigger right here at the bottom. Now moving over to the F-Note 5X, once again, giant piece of foam, but there's a circular cutout for where your beaters actually land and for the two sensors. Meanwhile, if we take a look at the Pearl Emerge, which I keep calling the Pearl E-Mimic while I'm filming and I don't know why, I haven't gotten a chance to remove the mesh head, but you can see right through it. Your kick drum beater is hitting the mesh, but then there's resistance in the form of a pad right behind it. Now those kick drums that we just covered are a little bit on the larger side of things, but if we shrink down to something like a 12-inch kick drum, they also have a ton of foam. So this is the kick drum on the Yamaha DTX 10K. It uses 3 different layers of foam. A lighter layer, like a black sort of tougher layer, and then a really dense layer of foam. The piezo is between layers 2 and 3. If you take a look at a 12-inch Roland kick drum, the KD120, it also uses a giant foam cylinder. However, in this case, it's one solid piece. It's not a bunch of different layers, and the trigger is a separate piece. Even if you scale down to an even smaller kick drum, like the Cat Percussion KT4, you're still hitting a piece of foam that's right behind it. So that's just a few examples, but I feel like you get the point I'm trying to make. All these companies have a slightly different design, but you can tell they always emphasize having a big piece of foam on the inside that presses against the inner side of your mesh head, probably just there to increase the trigger accuracy or let you use less aggressive trigger settings, while also reducing rebound a little bit depending on the kick drum we're talking about. So now that we have a rough idea of what the internals of stock electronic kick drums looks like, now let's compare that versus trigger systems that you can buy online to convert acoustic shells into electronic. There's 3 basic categories of kick drum triggers. You got the clip-on external triggers, you got the internal side-mounted triggers, and then you got the bar trigger designs. If you get a clip-on trigger or if you get an internal side-mounted trigger, you're going to have to add the damping system yourself. Usually what you'll have to do is get a bunch of pillows or a bunch of blankets and stuff that kick drum full of that. You can't get away with just one pillow because they tend to fall over time. Meanwhile, if you buy a bar trigger that has a giant chunk of foam as part of their design, like for example Pintec or UFO drums, you probably don't even need to put any fabric on the inside of your drum because they've already factored that into the design of the trigger itself. Now, of course, more is always better. And also, if you put a blanket inside your drum, that helps reduce the overall volume, especially if you got a resonant head, you want to still have fabric on that to dampen that. But yeah, you don't necessarily desperately need to put a pillow inside of your kick drum if your trigger system already has sufficient amounts of foam. I can't tell you which kick drum triggers feel the best because I haven't really reviewed a ton of electronic kick drum triggers, but I can tell you that I really like the kick drum trigger system called the E-Bridge from UFO drums. All right, so that's option number 1 when it comes to making your kick drum feel less bouncy. Add a damping system, add some sort of muffling on the inside of your drum so that the mesh head doesn't bounce around as much and it reduces rebound. The second way though, is that if you have a really thin mesh head right now, buying a thicker mesh head can drastically improve your overall experience. Mesh heads come in 3 basic categories, by the way. You got 1-ply, you got 2-ply, and then you got 3-ply. For most people, in 99% of cases, I would stay away from 1-ply. The reason is the majority of 1-ply mesh heads are very, very thin, bouncy. They tend to stretch a lot. Actually, you can see where this mesh has stretched in the middle on the point of impact of the beaters. I don't know how well it comes across on camera, but I sure as heck can see it in real life. 2-ply mesh heads are usually a safe bet. Most companies use it. By most, I mean everybody uses 2-ply mesh heads. Roland, 2-Box, Yamaha, Alesis, Millennium, Carlsbro, F-Note, ATV, everybody on planet Earth uses 2-ply on their drum sets. And then 3-ply is the most popular with custom builders. So Jabeki, DrumTech, companies like that, they tend to use 3-ply. They give you that third layer of material, which gives you the potential of a less reboundy feel and also maybe a tiny bit more durability, because to rip through one of those, you'd have to rip through 3 plies instead of 2. But here's the big problem when it comes to shopping for mesh heads. It can be a useful metric in knowing how many plies of material that it has, but it doesn't really tell you anything at the same time. What you need to focus on more is how heavy is the mesh they're actually using for each one of those layers. For example, here's a 2-ply mesh head from some mystery company off of eBay, and here's a 2-ply mesh head from DrumTech. They're both 2-ply, but this one uses a thinner weave, and this company uses a thicker weave. That basically means the DrumTech Design Series will probably have less amount of rebound versus this mystery company that I can see right through. 1-ply mesh heads are even more confusing. Like here's an ultra thin 1-ply mesh head. This is the most common kind that you'll run across. Wouldn't buy this. But then here's an ultra thick 1-ply mesh head from DrumTech, the Pro Series, and it's amazing to play on. It's just so loud that I just don't actually recommend it to most people, but this doesn't feel anything like a Remo Sound Stroke. And then you've got like a weird middle ground where it is a thin, flimsy mesh head, but it's got a ton of foam on the back. This is a Evans DB1. And more recently, there's a drum head company based out of Japan that achieved a 2-ply-like consistency, but with only 1 layer of material. They recently teamed up with ATV. Even 3-ply doesn't really promise anything. For example, I've got all 3-ply mesh heads on my toms and my snare. Most of them are the DrumTech Real Feel, which doesn't give you much rebound. I like it that way. And then I've got an older generation Jabeki mesh head, which is way more bouncy. So what am I trying to say here? If your kick drum feels too bouncy, there's a chance that maybe you're using an ultra thin mesh head, and by going with a thicker brand from whatever company you choose, that will give you a better overall experience. By the way, quick little third bonus tip here. If you've cranked your mesh head so it's at a really, really high tension and you're wondering why it's so bouncy, you could always try easing down the tension a little bit. You got to be careful here. You have a certain window where you get the best triggering and the best feel. And if you go too loose on the kick drum head, then you start losing trigger accuracy, and you don't want to go that far. However, if you do have your kick drum head cranked right now and it's just way too bouncy, you could try easing down a little bit on the tension, and that could make the rebound go down a little bit. Now you might notice that I didn't really cover the Roland KD822 in this video or other products like it in that category. And that's because those systems are what they are. It's an all-in-one design. It's basically a KD10 kick drum tower built into an acoustic head, covered by a piece of wood on top of it. So they feel good. They're not overly bouncy. However, you can't change the rebound level or do anything to modify the feel. It's an all-in-one system that just is what it is. So it wasn't really worth talking about because it already does what it's supposed to. The downside of the KD822 is that it's easier to break because there's a very thin cable that is very easy to snap in half, which is what I've done to mine. Also, it's louder than mesh and triggers. It's also going to be more expensive as well, a whole third more expensive. So I'm not saying it's a bad product. It's actually a really good idea that somebody out there makes one of these. However, didn't really want to focus on it because you can't really change the way it feels. It just is what it is. All right, so that's the video. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Really, really appreciate it. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you in the next one.